Hello and welcome to IT 101 Prof. Here we have a quick tutorial on how to generate pivot tables in Excel. I have in front of me a file I got from Microsoft's website. It's a sample file for a store that sells outdoor equipment like tents, headlamps, sleeping bags, backpacks, and so on. This file is for a company, a fictitious company that has 3 locations, and here are the locations listed here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a quick pivot table that helps us summarize the data that we have on this file, which is about 700, 800 transactions over here. So before we jump into pivot tables, a few things to keep in mind so that your pivot tables come out nice and clean and clear is to make sure that your data is structured correctly. And what I mean by that is, let's take an example. Here I have columns A through H, and all of them have a heading onto them, except if you look at columns C and H, they both are called column 1 and column 2, which don't really go with the theme we have for the actual headers. For example, transaction, location, date, and items. So you want to make sure that your data is cleaned up, it's using the right names. The next thing you want to make sure is there's no blank rows, blank columns that are part of the table, because this may end up messing up your pivot tables. It may end up coming up with blank rows on your pivot tables, and it might mess up the data or the summary reports that you're trying to create on pivot tables. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on column 1 and delete. And I'm going to right click on row number 8, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that. The next thing that you need to make sure in order to work with the pivot table is that your data is formatted as a table. And the quick way to check it out, whether a data is formatted as a table or not, is when you are clicked somewhere inside this data, you will see a Table Tools menu up at the top. And that's my Table Tools design menu. This tells me that the data I'm looking at is formatted as a table. If I click outside, menu will disappear. I click back inside, the menu will appear. So just make sure that your data is formatted as a table. If it's not, select your data and then use the format as a table option to create the table. All right. And the last thing I want to do before I create my table is, before I create my pivot table, is to give a name to my table. So for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and give it a name, call it sales, hit enter. And that's the name that I've given to my table. So to create a pivot table, let's go to the insert menu, click on pivot table. Now we're looking at a file where we only have one table that we are dealing with. You might come across files that have multiple tables, and you need to pick one table to create that pivot table. So in that case, you will have to type in the name of the table that you want to work with. So here I have sales, so I'm just going to type in sales because that's the name of the table that we gave, and hit OK. When you insert this pivot table, you will see a new sheet on your Excel window has been created for you with a pivot table, a few fields, or the pivot table window, if you will. And I have access to two new menus, which are Pivot Table Tools, Analyze, and Design. This video, we're just going to look at some basic functionality of pivot tables, how they work, and some of the basic settings you can change to display your data. So first things, when you look up on the right over here, you'll see a bunch of different fields over here. And these fields correspond to your column headings that you see over here: transaction, location, date, item, wholesale, and so on. Those column headings I've transformed over here into your fields. Now, if I click anywhere outside of this box, you're going to see my menus disappear, and you're going to see my pivot table window has disappeared as well. Click back inside, and everything is back up over here. Now, while going through these fields, I noticed that my column 2 over here, which I was supposed to rename, and actually speaking, the name of this column should be total amount, right? Because that is taking my wholesale price and then multiplying that by my number of units sold. So this should actually be called total amount. Rather than changing anything over here, because this pivot table is linked to my table, you go back to your table. Let's go back up at the top, and you rename your column over here. So total amount. Hit enter. Let's go back to your pivot table. Now you'll notice that my column name did not change over here. That's because I still need to click on Analyze and hit refresh. And if you watch down here, that refresh will change the name of my column to total amount. So anytime you make a change to your data, your source data, make sure you update it back in your, you refresh it back on your pivot table. All right, so let's go ahead and start summarizing my data. So let's say first I would like to take a look at my location, and I want to know the total amount of sales that I have for each of my locations. So my location goes into a single row, and my amount, which is my total amount, as soon as I put a check mark, it will automatically bring it over to my values section over here. I can always drag and drop my fields. So you can see I can drag this down over here. I can drag my location down over here. So that's the quickest way. You can either put a check mark or drag your fields down and create your pivot tables. Now you'll notice over here, the data that I bring in over here, this is actually in dollars, but that's not how Excel is displaying. So let's change it. Now, because this is a setting that you want to change, you have to go down to this menu and select value field settings. There are quite a few things you can change over here. One, you can change what this column is called. Right now it's called sum of total amount. I can just call it amount if I wanted to. I can change different ways of how my data is displayed, or I can go to my number format here and change this to currencies. Click on OK. OK. And now you see all my amounts for each location in dollars. Now let's say I would like to filter this data, or actually dive deep into the data, and for each location I want to split this out into the actual items I stored. Here's what I mean. If I drag the item field to my columns, it takes that total number I had and now splits it by all the items that I have that I sold at each of the store over here. So right, backpacks, car racks, headlamps, and so on and so forth. So that's how I can quickly drag other fields into my columns, or I could drag my item from columns to rows. Now, both ways it's correct. It's just how you want to display your data. So depending on your preference, depending on what is required, you can move this field from rows to columns, and you can change the way your data is displayed. What you can also do is, if I were to move this item from columns to filters, now I've created a quick filter over here which I can click on and select either one or multiple filters over here. So hit car rack, okay, and now I'm only looking at data for the item car rack at these locations. Go back in again, and I can clear up all my filters, or just click on all, hit OK, and I've got all my items here. I'm going to move this over here for 1 second. Now, instead of having the numbers over here in total amount sold, if I want to know the total units sold, so I want to know how many backpacks, how many car racks for each location did I sell, then instead of the amount, I would bring in units sold, and here's all my units sold over here, right? One other thing, if I want to do, I want to see the total number of transactions. So let me go back over here to my sales sheet. I want to know total number of transactions by tent, by location, right? So by item and by location. Then what I would do is I would bring in my transaction over here. No more units sold, we don't need that. And instead of totaling them up, I would change this to count. Hit OK. So now this is telling me I have 52 backpack transactions or 52 transactions in California where I sold a backpack versus car rack and so on and so forth, right? So this is how you quickly create pivot tables. And in my second part of the video, I will talk a little bit about these two tools, Analyze and Design, and we'll go through what some of the other options are available for pivot tools. Thank you for watching.